And good morning. Good morning, fellas. It's we're now in the darkness again. Have you guys noticed that? 7 o'clock, dark. It's getting a little light. When I got up, it was dark. So let's go ahead and proceed with our study. With John, we're towards the end. I think we got one more week in chapter 13. It's taking place in what is called the upper room. It's with Jesus and his disciples just prior to his arrest, and so this is alone time with the Master, Jesus and the disciples, and so we're looking at it from that perspective. Last time when we were together, we looked at how Jesus is preparing his disciples. Here he is. From my perspective, I believe he was in full knowing of what was about to occur, the horrific events which are going to take place within the next few hours and endure through the next few days or the next 24 hours. But yet, in that perspective, from that context, he's actually preparing his disciples for these challenges that are about to occur. What we suggested last time, and good morning, Jeff.
Morning,
is
sir.
Remember I used an analogy of a house and the idea of revealing certain portions of that house. So what we see in the beginning is merely a rectangle, but actually it turns out to be something quite different. Hey, Sterling, good morning. Short time no see. And we've Jeff and Sterling, thanks for joining. We've already started. But what we talked about is this idea that what we see has actually been revealed to us by grace, and we understand it through faith. That is I think, a much more healthy way of viewing the world around us, is that what we have been given, what we understand, is something that has been revealed to us by God Almighty, and we embrace that through faith. I think that'll keep us out of trouble. We then discussed how this should affect how I view myself, how I relate, interact with others, and finally, how I navigate the road ahead. I think it's a much more healthy way of viewing life, and again, will keep us out of trouble. Let's read John 13, 33 through 35. That's our text for today, where Jesus, Judas has left and the door has been shut. And Jesus says, "Little children, I'm still with you a little longer. You will look for me. And just as I said to the Jews, now I also say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come. I'm giving you a new commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for the other." That's the text today. Let's do a deep dive in it. And 33 through 35, we're going to spend about 20 minutes talking about it. A portion of that is going to be a super slow-mo version as we get into this, to dissect it. The first verse, hey, Carl. "Little children, I'm still with you a little longer. You will look for me, just as I said to the Jews, now I say to you, where I'm going, you cannot come." That's the text. This is the third time within the Gospel of John that Jesus has spoken this truth to others. The first one is to a mixed crowd at the temple during the Feast of Lights, a major festival, and it's in chapter 7, 34 and 36. He states, "Where I am going, you cannot come." In the second instance is in also the temple, in a portion of the temple where the woman caught in adultery is brought to Jesus, and Jesus addresses the accusers at that time in 8:21, the same thing. You will look for me and will not find me, because where I'm going, you cannot come. Now to the third, well, before I move on, it's important, I look at other commentators to see what they say about this, and there's a way of thinking of some commentators, conservative in values, that are quick to point out that the first two instances, which are cited above, are spoken by Jesus as judgment to outsiders of the faith, whereas the difference being this one in verse 33, Jesus begins verse 33 with little children, which is an endearing and an embracing term. And they then say that this one is different because he's saying it to those who are followers of Jesus. I would like to take point with that. How I think, by looking at the text, what is true, as I state here, is true for all who heard these words spoken by Jesus, this statement, regardless of their belief or state of unbelief. What Jesus is talking about is not about being in or out. He's talking to people who are human beings, and this is part of being human. And here's the point. It's only natural for any listener, 34, 36, 8:21, and also applicable to his followers, 13:33, to be thinking in terms of physical presence, the person of Jesus of Nazareth, as necessary for efficacy. They are looking for a leader, a Messiah, to set up a kingdom. And it's pretty impossible in their minds, from their perspective, that if their Messiah is going to set up a kingdom the way they perceive it is to be, if he's not there, the deal is off. And Jesus is preparing them for something entirely different. In their minds, presence equals power to act on their behalf. A strong Messiah doesn't leave. No presence means no power to act. Jesus is preparing his disciples for this reality that's going to happen. Jesus continues to prepare his disciples by telling them that there is a time coming real soon when he will not be present, but everything is going to be okay. There is no need for alarm when this time comes. It will be quite different, yes. It will require faith, yes, but it's far from being over. And in my opinion, it's the same as our environment today. We worship a living Jesus who is not physically present in a human body with us. That is exactly our context today. And he's preparing, Jesus of Nazareth is preparing his disciples for that reality that's about to happen when he goes to the cross. Verse 34, I'm giving you a new commandment. Notice emphasis, new commandment, something entirely new. And that new commandment is that you love one another just as I have loved you, that you also love one another. He just didn't pick this out of his ethereal religious things to say brain. It has a direct correlation with what has just occurred, and we'll talk about that. Jesus here, being the master of his disciples within the upper room, articulates to his followers what he names as the new commandment. it's important for us to ask, well, what does he mean by new commandment? To begin to discern the answer to this question, we look at within the story line. And so I got this huge arrow that comes across, and that is representing the immediate storyline that we're looking at, that he's referring to. Again, he's not just pulling this out of a hat. And what's the storyline? Number one, I go back to chapter 13, 1 and 2. And prior to that, in chapter 12, 11, and 10, would be leading up to what we're seeing here in chapter 13. And what we see in chapter 13, 1 through 20, through the washing of the disciples' feet, is overall the ability and the capacity to receive love. There is a propensity within us human beings that rejects love. And that whole interaction there in 13, 1 through 20, remember the pushback by Peter. You can't wash my feet. You're the master. I'm the servant. Well, if you're going to wash my feet, wash all of me. We get it. We just overreact, and he's being human. And then after he's finished, he says, "Do you realize what I've done to you?" So it's all about we as humans having the ability and the capacity to be able to receive what is given to us. Easier said than done. Then he moves from 13, 21 through 30 with the story of Judas, and that is love regardless, even towards a known betrayer. That is where some commentators depart, or I depart, because we have, my opinion, we have a human propensity to find the bad guy, so we have someone to blame. And that is the perspective that is out there, that Judas is a bad guy. And I don't think he's a bad guy. I think he's a misinformed guy. And he's trying to make something happen and doing it his way. That's in 13, 1 through 2. And Jesus extends love and friendship to this known betrayer and allows the known betrayer to do what the known betrayer needs to do. That is absolutely mind-boggling. Finally, here, 13, 31 through 35, as you have now been shown, Jesus is saying, you now do the same. Thus, the new commandment. The tie-in is right here in this center phrase, love regardless. This is what he's showing the disciples, loving regardless, the one who is perceived as unlovable, and that's the basis for the new commandment. Yeah, Dave, you got that. I see that hand. Go ahead. Go ahead, Dave.
I had to unmute there. I often refer to a translation too that has tried to be very close to what the original Aramaic or Hebrew said, and in 30, let me find it. Anyway, it's not arguing with you; it's supporting your case here. Down in 34, it's going to say, "I'm giving you a new commandment," and it reads, "You must continually love one another."
Wow. Yeah.
And it also refers back to Leviticus 19, 16. You will not go up and down as a talebearer. Nope, sorry, wrong place. 19, 18. You will not avenge or bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you will love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord.
Oh, wow.
So it goes all the way back.
Yeah, that's really, and that's a great segue, Dave. Thanks for sharing that. That's a real segue into what we want to talk about. I think we continue with 35, excuse me, because this is the punch. And I'll get to your point in a minute, or your confirmation. 35, by demonstrating this love regardless, the new commandment, Jesus makes a point, and that point is by this action, this Dave says continually, by this action of love on a continual basis extended towards even those you perceive as unlovable, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love one for another. That's 35. Now, Jesus stated, here's the punch, and the why underlying his directive to love each other. Here we have a review of what we just talked about. This type of love that we're talking about, that Dave has just reinforced, which Jesus has just demonstrated, that we've seen in chapter 13 as displayed in the arrow above, and how he will continue on by leaving the upper room and entering into the passion of the cross, the atrocities, and the detail. And through that, he's demonstrating something. And I've got 2 points here. Number one, this type of love is what affects people for the good. This is effective. And this is authored by God Almighty as demonstrated in and through the person of Christ. This affects people for good. Number 2, this type of love demonstration, this is what changes behavior. Love changes behavior. Quick story, and I was thinking about this just here briefly. When I was a late teen, early 20, I got the harebrained teen brain idea that I was going to quit my job. I was in an apprenticeship. I didn't go to college, but I had a good, stable apprenticeship program. I was working. I was dating Sandra, who became my wife later. And I had this harebrained idea that I was going to give it all up and go on this wild trip across the United States to do whatever teens do. I don't know, but I wanted to just quit all obligations and go have this nomadic kind of lifestyle with no consideration on how I would eat or travel. But that was out of my head. And I went on like this for weeks with my poor parents, and finally arguing how this was good, how I needed to do this and all this. And of course they were pushing back as you and I would do as parents. But what finally broke this for me was my dad came to me one night and he says, I'd really like to talk to you. And he was in tears. I never saw my dad express that level of emotion up to that point. He did several times after that, but that was that was eye-opening to me. And he said, listen, you have a wonderful job. You've got a great career ahead of you right here. You've got a young woman who's lovely, who loves you, and you're in a relationship with her, and you have a family right here. Please reconsider and don't do this. And he was crying. And it was love. He wasn't preaching at me. He was demonstrating love. And that love broke me. I left that meeting, that 10-minute interaction, and I decided right there, I'm not going to go. And it was because my dad expressed that level of love to me. That's what changed me. It wasn't the preaching. It wasn't the arguing. It wasn't who's right. It was the love. And because love is powerful. Jesus states two facts in regard to communicating to others what he calls the good news. And Dave, we're going to get to what you were saying here. First, the person, I'm commenting on this first. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples. Point one. Point two, if you have love one for another. First, the person who extends friendship to a known betrayer, in this case, Judas, is recognized as a follower of Jesus. That action is, when that is demonstrated, that is recognized by the general public as something remarkable and something inviting. And Jesus calls it, you be my disciple, follower of Jesus. Second, as the community expresses this level of love to each other, in other words, people we disagree with, people that we would perceive as unlovable, when we extend love to these people, it will be communicated to those outside of the believing community that community is following Jesus. There's a drawing power to that type. It's a magnetic power that is being demonstrated, and it draws other people into that community. It's drawing, that type of thing. According to Jesus, it is this expression of love, either by an individual or by the community, which communicates identity as being followers of Jesus. He's stating so clearly, this is what it means if you and I are following Jesus. We will demonstrate it, and it'll look like this. Thus, new commandment. Continued, and now is where I'm going to imply or apply the slowdown. This is the slow-mo. We are really going to dice this up, so bear with me. And Dave, this is the slide I wanted to bring us to. Okay, what this means is that there is a message, and that message is to be communicated through Jesus's followers. Jesus calls that message in short terms the good news. I have good news. And we call it the gospel, good news. This message exists because there is a need. I'm going to the philosophical level here, so bear with me. There's a message to be communicated to you and me, followers of Jesus. And this message is important. It exists because there's a need. People need good news. We need good news. In the world, realities around us, we need good news. But there are those who demonstrate the message, and there are those who need the message. Okay, that's like 101. So here is where we start to meddle. The responsibility, and I'd like to redefine that as not an obligatory kind of detail that is like going to the dentist, of which I'll do at 8:15. The responsibility is like a privilege. It's an opportunity. It's a calling. It's an invitation. The opportunity is placed on the disciple to demonstrate the message as Jesus is demonstrating. Okay, here's where I meddle. Note, generally and very broadly speaking, I see a problem in me, first of all, and in the more broadly believing community in our thinking. Generally and broadly speaking, the emphasis shared within the believing community is to get those who are outside the community to change how they think in order to align with how the community thinks. That is absolutely backwards to what Jesus is calling his disciples to. He's saying, you demonstrate this level of love and those outside people will be coming to you. We do it backwards. We say we've got our nice, tidy group, and if you change your way of thinking, you can join us and align with who we are. Okay. I know that there's some simplicity or simplistic kind of thinking in that, but I think it's worthy to think about. As the disciples demonstrate this type of love, the message is communicated. It's the demonstration that communicates the message. As the message is communicated, those who need the message are naturally drawn towards the believing community. They are drawn towards because in what they observe, they see life. Thus, the scripture said, they shall know you are Christians by your love, not by your doctrine or how self-righteous we are, but by your love. Note, it may be a good idea for those of us who claim being Christ followers to ask ourselves, what type of message am I communicating? Primarily through my actions. Summary. Okay, now this is where I want to show something. I've had a lot of fun watching the old Twilight Zone series. I don't know if I mentioned it. And what I'm doing, there's 5 seasons, and every night, every other night, I watch 1 or 2 episodes, and I'm picking my very favorites, and I'm buying them, and I want to put together, I'm going to propose this at church, actually, as a adult education kind of thing, where we watch the episode, they're 25 minutes, and then we have a discussion. Now, these are on the very favorite. I think Rod Serling he had a brilliance about him a lot of the time. Some of them I don't connect with, but I've picked this a little video segment out of Twilight Zone season 4, episode 17, called "The Passage on Lady Anne." Now I'm going to prep you for this. And I don't know how, it's not important that we're going to watch the video, but you're going to miss a lot. And I've got the text out here. So just bear with me. Okay, the setting of this Twilight Zone is there's a young couple and they're really struggling to get along. He's a driving business guy and all she wants is to be with him. But it's, it's not like bad guy, good guy. It's in their relationship, they're struggling. But they sign up for this voyage, and I won't go into all the detail. They sign up for this over the water voyage from New York to England on this ship called the Lady Anne. And that's where the story starts. But what they don't realize is that while on this voyage, they're going to learn about themselves. They will be forced to face the true realities of life in hardcore ways. And most importantly, they will learn the role of love, Love, love. Okay, now I'm gonna play this quote, and you can't pick it up from the video, but during this voyage, at the beginning stages of their journey to understanding, they're mentored by an older couple like our age. And the woman is Millie McKenzie. It's Mr. and Mrs. McKenzie. And so Mr. and Mrs. McKenzie invite the young couple for dinner on the ship. And Millie has a monologue about the history of the ship. They knew a lot about it. And this is what she says about love. She says, love has its own particular point of view. It sees everything larger than life. Nothing is too ornate, too fanciful, too dramatic. Love demands the theatrical and then transfigures it. It turns the grotesque into the lovely as a child does. With it, we can see what we wish to see in other people. Without it, we can't see anything at all. Man, that is a great quote. Okay, let's watch Millie do it, and then we'll go back and discuss it. So here's passage on Lady Anne, and we'll see how it comes through.
Was done for young people.
There's
to the others are tricksing the ridiculous. Love has his own particular point of view. It sees everything larger than life. Nothing is too ornate, too fanciful, too dramatic. Love demands the theatrical and then transfigures it. It turns the grotesque into the lovely, as a child does.
Look at her. Look at her.
With it, we can see what we wish to see in other people. Without it, we can't see anything at all.
Okay. It was really quick, and I know, I mean, I've had a head start. I want us to look at her last phrase. Millie says about love, with it, love, we can see. It allows us to see what we wish to see in other people. Without it, we can't see anything at all. Table time. Jesus is clear that there's a message to communicate, the gospel. This message is his message he calls the good news. The reason this message exists is because there is a universal need. The message has been communicated through the person of Jesus of Nazareth, and it's what John defines as the Word becoming flesh. This message is to be communicated by those who follow him. The body of this message is communicated through human beings loving even one who is perceived as unlovable. As a Christ follower, you and me, if I am to extend love to the unlovable, what does this look like in and through my life? And dear Sterling, we talked about this at breakfast last Sunday morning in St. Louis, didn't we? I'd like to know, I shared with Sterling how I viewed that. I'd like to hear your thoughts. If we are to extend love to the unlovable, what does that look like in and through my life?
It starts with a deep breath.
We've all experienced it. Jeff, your lips are moving, but your sound is not.
Oh, sorry. When you read this passage, I started to grind on this a little bit. And then when you gave your example of your father coming to you, my thought was that Christ has just given his disciples an impossible new commandment outside of him.
Yes.
So the key for me to love anybody, regardless of whether they're lovable or unlovable, it starts with my relationship with Christ, because he says, love them as I have loved you. So the love flows from him through me to them. So when your dad came to you and said, please don't do this. If that had been your car mechanic, would you have taken heed of that in the same measure that you did with your dad? I don't think so,
No, I
because
don't
you're not
think
in
so.
relationship with your car mechanic.
No,
You're in relationship with a father who loves you. And therefore you took that to heart. The same way Christ loves me, I can take that to heart. And that's the only way that I can pass any of that love on to somebody, especially somebody that's unlovable. It flows from Christ through me to them.
wow. Jeff, you've got a wonderful way of putting things together for us. Thank you. That was great. Other comments, guys?
I was thinking about the unlovable many times in my mind. I think they've got some sort of a sign on their head or their chest, and that guy in the back of the church is an unlovable, and let's go over there and welcome him or something, you know. And I think more often than not, the unlovable are unidentified. We have no idea who these people are. It's most probably yourself. And I know that I've walked into churches many times and into communities, and I just didn't feel very lovable. I didn't feel very worthy. I didn't feel part of the community at all. And it was the simple acceptance that the family gave to me that brought me from being unlovable to being loved, which made the world a difference. And I couldn't even say what it was they did. They didn't, maybe they just poured me a cup of coffee or gave me a hug and saying, good to see you, Vince. And this type of thing. I know for me, I often categorize the unlovable as a category of humanity, that, you're the woman with an issue of blood or something, that everybody knows who you are and you live down the block. But it's all of us at any given moment in our life. You've got this feeling of unworthiness and not being loved and not being accepted. And then you find yourself in the midst of the disciples, and they do something. They show Jesus to you in some way, and now you're whole again. It's not a doctrinal understanding that they gave you. It was a relationship feeling that they gave you. I feel it in church all the time. That's the only reason I go. That's why I go.
It's so good, Vince. It's the person sitting next to me. It's the person sitting next to you.
Yep.
As he said, love one another. Who is it? It's the disciples. They rub. I mean, those of us who've seen The Chosen, we see the rub going on in the natural interactions of the disciples. Of Jesus is saying, love each other. We'll start there. Another great comment, Vince. Other guys, what do you guys think?
Another thought, Mike. If I'm going to love as Christ has loved me, I have to basically define how he loves me. I have to say, okay, how does Christ love me? Well, one thing he's about to demonstrate is that he loves me completely and sacrificially. He loves me to the point of giving his life for me. And then if I'm to love like he loves me, then the term that comes to mind in my life, and that is the most difficult thing to do for someone I consider unlovable, and that is to love sacrificially, which means come out of my comfort zone, do something, or I don't even know if do is the right thing, but extend love to somebody that I don't agree with. I don't dress the same. I don't look the same, but that is a sacrificial type of love, is to extend love to somebody that, you know, I just don't see eye to eye with. And that's what I say, define as sacrificial.
You're another great comment. What I was telling Sterling on Sunday is that, guys, my wife is very lovable. She is not an unlovable person by any means. And she's a wonderful woman. But at times in our relationship, from my perspective, I view her as unlovable. And it is my responsibility that I've got to move beyond that. That she is my spouse. She is my dear one. She is the one who is lovable. But at times I just find it, I find it that she is very unlovable. The problem is not with her. It's my perception. And I want to believe that it's our challenge, men, the guys on this call, that this applies to our very closest relationships that we have. It's not the guy, Vince, that sits in the back of the church. It's the people I interact with every single day. This is the level that we're called to as disciples.
I think in keeping with that, and I won't read the whole section, but if we look at James, which James is one of those guys that, you know, seems to not very often pull any punches. He kind of
Oh, that's true.
kind of gets right to the point. And starting really in 2:5 or 2:6 along there through about 2:13, he's talking about this very thing in terms of not picking and choosing who you love and how you love them, because that's not what the commandment says. He says you will love one another, and it says you will continually love one another.
Yeah.
So in these verses, he's talking about how difficult that can be sometimes. But if you're going to do it right, you're going to do it right. And if you're not doing it right, I mean, this sounds stupid. If you're not doing it right, you're doing it wrong. So stop it. And it's pretty powerful section. Basically, James 2, 4, 5 on through 13 is a good chunk to look at.
Yeah. And what was that reference once again for
James?
James
2.
James 2.
Starting at about verse 4 or 5 through verse 13.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, that's good. We'll take a look at that. Yeah, that's really good. Other thoughts?
I think you're really onto it, Mike, in pointing out that it's as people come closer to us, or as we move among those who are closest to us, that's where the difficulty of this commandment comes in. You know, we toss around in our culture, we toss around the word love quite freely.
Yes.
Somebody on stage at a concert will tell all the adoring fans that you know, I love you all. And that's pretty easy, quite frankly, when you have adoring fans. It takes a supernatural love to sort of, I'll just, you know, toss out an example, to love the boisterous, obnoxious uncle who has to come to every holiday gathering and destroy conversation at the table and all of that kind of thing, you know. That's where the rub really comes in with this.
It really does.
That you live day to day with.
Good.
I guess it goes back to you, Jeff. It takes a supernatural flow.
Yeah.
To live that out.
Or thank you, Steve. Great comment. You know, the boisterous uncle. Um, all of us have been in situations where but mud has been slung to us for something, for some reason. Some of it justifiable, some of it very unjustifiable. But to what degree can I extend love in that situation? That's where the rubber hits the road. And we church people are the absolute worst. And what we do to each other is, not to make anybody feel guilty by any means, but what is done in the name of God to each other is absolutely horrible.
So my situation actually is, and you guys have heard this before, is that I had, when I got married, I was not a believer. And so, at that time, I had, really a strong racial inferiority complex where I really couldn't extend love to myself. So over the period of 8 years, from being loved by my wife, and my wife, when I married her, her Christian friend said, "You shouldn't marry. You're going to be unequally yoked." But she was telling them, she says, "Well, he's a good person. He's willing to go to church to make sure that the kids get Sunday school, my kids get Sunday school and whatever, and and I know he comes from a strong Christian background in terms of his mom and whatever." So she kind of extended love in a way to me as an unlovable. Most of the unlovable part was from my sin. So, when I became a Christian, I was not only able to extend love to others, but I can then extend Christ's love to myself as an unlovable.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm making sense.
Tatsi, you are making 125% sense, because what you hit the nail on the head with. The most difficult person to extend love to, most unlovable, is me. I mean, that is where we have our issue, and that creates all kinds of unhealthy interactions because of our self-perception that I'm unlovable. It's just not true. And we don't believe it. That's the sad part.
I was thinking about how attractive a love interaction is to
Yes.
others, how desirable it is. I go to church early, time wise, and I like to get a cup of coffee before and see who's there and so on. And last Sunday I got there 15 minutes early or whatever, and I'm drinking coffee and I saw this person who I hadn't seen in a while, and we're chatting, how's it going? How are the kids? Blah, blah, blah. And she admittedly, I mean, she's an attractive person, and she's a very loving kind of a individual. But in the conversation, she goes, "Oh, I just got to give you a hug." And so she stood up and gave me a hug, which was nice. But all of the rest of the hallway were like standing in line. They were like, "Hey, where's my hug? Where's my?" And I took it not as a hug. Where is my recognition of humanity? When am I going to have somebody, show that I exist and that I'm here and that I matter?
Yes.
And an acknowledgement, person to person, that I'm in the same universe as you. living alone. I mean, I've spoken to John about this. I live alone. If it wasn't for the only relationship I have sometimes is the mirror of my house. I mean, if it wasn't for that, I'd feel really alone. It's difficult, but when somebody comes by and gives you even the smallest acknowledgement of your humanity and shows you a little bit of the love of God, it changes your life.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And I think that person, I don't want to say that unbelievers, whatever they are without love, because they have much love. But the fact that she was a believer and we were in the context of Christian unity, it was in her head. Let me hug this guy. It was a good thing. I know she was a disciple because of that.
Guys, this is not intended as a horn toot. It's intended as a perspective. Most of you any of you who have known me for a long time know that I am a tactile person. Matter of fact, I have to be careful in my conversation partner in class at CSU with Muslim women not to reach out and touch them on the shoulder, and because that's just the way I am. So part of that is natural for me, but we need to be aware that God and the Spirit will use us at certain times in certain circumstances in ways that we would never imagine. And I will never, ever forget, because I don't usually do the grocery shopping. I don't usually go to the store. I had gone to get a couple of things that were on Betty's list and so forth. And as usual, I was wandering around trying to find what I needed because I didn't know my way around the store. And there was a lady in the aisle, probably, I don't know, late 30s, 40s. And she was just standing there on the verge of tears. She was expressing all kinds of stress and grief. And I mean, she just looked absolutely horrible. And I stood there for a couple of seconds, and I was moved to go say, "Ma'am, can I help you with something?" And I don't even remember what she said. She blubbered some things and this, that, and the other. And without asking her or anything else, I embraced her.
Wow.
And hugged her. It wasn't a passionate hug. I don't mean that.
No, far from it. No.
And immediately, her whole demeanor just changed. And we just chatted briefly. I don't know who she was, never saw her again. So those are circumstances, guys, at least for me, that are extremely encouraging. And I guess my point in sharing the story, it can be a little scary sometimes. I mean, most of us are not prone in the middle of a grocery store to embracing a woman that we've never seen before or even talked to before. And yet, that's what was required in that moment.
Yeah, that's a great story, Dave. Thank you. This is what we're talking about. You didn't do it. You did it out of a heart of compassion. That was it. But it has a side effect, as Jesus is teaching us right here. All people will know that you are my disciples when you have love one for another.
Mike, I had a question when I read this, I'm like, how is this a new commandment?
Yes.
We're told in the Old Testament, love your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, I just figured out that the new commandment was to love as I have loved you. And Dave just described a situation that was descriptive of how Jesus loved. And it was when Christ approached a leper, everybody else was backing up because they didn't want to get unclean by approaching this leper. But Christ reached out and would touch somebody that was untouchable, unlovable. And that is the difference. That's the new commandment, not to love each other, because that's already been given, but to love as I have loved. And so we have to look through scripture and find those instances of how Christ loved and be able to demonstrate that to others.
Yeah, thank you. Another good comment, Jeff. My perception of that is yes, and yes in relation to what you said. I'm looking specifically at how his interaction with Judas went. That love, that level of love that we are to demonstrate goes to the person who is absolutely unlovable, in this case, a known betrayer. And so I'm tying it specifically to what, I mean, love, the level of love that we are to display is at that level. He's going to go out and sell him out, and Jesus allowed him to go. That's just mind-boggling to me. And one more, we got time for Bob. You haven't said a thing. You know, I don't mean to pick on you, but I pick on you.
Well, I tell you what, I don't have much to add to this, but I sure had a lot that I needed to hear this morning.
Huh. Wow.
So, you know, it's been really, really helpful to me to listen to that.
Wow.
This is not an unfamiliar set of scripture either, but it seems apropos and maybe a bow on the package of this morning.
Yeah.
Out of 1 Corinthians, which we've all heard. Love is patient. Love is kind. Not jealous. Love does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor. It does not seek things for itself. It does not become angry. It does not charge evil to another. It does not rejoice over unrighteousness, but rejoices together in truth. It endures all things. It believes all things. It hopes all things. It is steadfast in all things.
Wow. That, man, what a way to end it. What a way to end it, Dave. Thank you so much. And I think we will end it there. I go back, because I get the last thing. I want to go back to Millie's response, Millie McKenzie. With it, 1 Corinthians is saying that with love, we can see what we wish to see in other people. Without it, we can't see anything at all. Have a good week, guys. And thanks for the great comments and thoughts. And I will be gone next week, but we'll be here the week after. I know you guys go ahead and meet. So thanks for the great thoughts, guys. Have a good week. See you
Thanks,
next week.
Mike.
Yeah. Bye now.
Thanks, Mike.